So, 2025 is kind of unusual. To kind of explain would be a little difficult, but here's the best way I can describe it. Many artists who have some legacy or history, incumbents, are doing extremely well, and many new artists are kind of struggling, which is infuriating for me as someone who listens to new music. This is probably one of the first years where I kind of feel, I don't know, dejected as I like listening to new music. I've also not had the time to really explore stuff given that I've been working and was working on a pretty big project that got me sidetracked, and as a result, you're getting a lot of these fucking quickie videos. I had a lot of thoughts to say about cowards, but the longer the year has gone on, the less interested I've become in it for a lot of reasons. Fucking cat hair everywhere. For a lot of reasons, I should clarify. So for the most part, when Sleep Token, of all people, started appearing on the charts, I started to get really interested in why. If you don't remember, in 2023, well, more specifically, last year in November, I covered some of the albums I missed at 2023, and Sleep Token's Take Me Back to Eden was one of them. This really large, swathing, and strange post-metal album. It was one of the most interesting things I had ever listened to, and while the singles leading up to this album weren't anything special, the fact alone that it was charting at all kind of blew my mind. A band like Sleep Token being as popular as they are is extremely rare. Once the album came out, however, the reaction from people was really mixed. There were people who had very strong opinions, talking about how god-awful or disappointing it was. There were people who liked it. There was this debate between casual and hardcore fans of this band, and all of that was really interesting till I thought about it for 2 seconds, and then I realized what was actually happening. So let's just get my fucking biases out of the way. I like the album. I don't think it's great. It's kind of empty, but I really like the compositions, and I do really like the songwriting. I think the trap and hip hop and R&B influences are pretty terrible, but when the album is just straight post-metal or ambient, it is really fucking good. And honestly, I think it's just a really interesting album. But more than anything, this is the first album that we've had in years that genuinely, in terms of at least popular albums, that feels new. I don't think we've really had like a new kind of sound since 2021. And that's not to say there haven't been new things, quote unquote. There have been, but specifically in popular music, this is the first time I've heard something completely different, and I'm really interested to see where it goes. But we have to remember, this could be a Smells Like Teen Spirit, or this could more likely be a fluke. But as far as I can tell, this has been one of the most interesting developments I've seen in popular music. So once again, like with my Boone video, I'm not really covering the album because for the most part, at least to me, this is kind of the same Sleep Token album as the last one. This is still the band to me that goes, that's my Sleep Token impression. So as far as I could tell, this is still a lot of what I enjoyed from Take Me Back to Eden. Not nearly as good. One comment I did notice in the album is that it is a pretty good rock, metal, or ambient album, but there's better music out there for it, and I have to agree with it. This is a pretty empty album, all things considered. It's just really well made. So, what's the deal with the backlash? Well, unlike Benson Boone, this isn't really just me repeating something we've talked about before. This is actually something interesting and worth talking about. The last major metal act that have really charted was in 2019 and 2011. In 2011, it was bands like Kings of Leon and Imagine Dragons, and in 2019, we had Slipknot and Tool chart on the metal charts. And for a variety of reasons, but in 2011 was essentially the last year that rock music had any significance on the pop charts, and then after that, it was mostly electro glitch music. And it wasn't really until 21 Pilots' Trenches that it really came back, along with, in 2019, Slipknot and Tool's new album getting immensely popular. But in terms of new music, that 21 Pilots thing was the last major rock movement we've had. Olivia Rodrigo, no. In 2020, Machine Gun Kelly technically released a pop-punk comeback, but most people would rather credit Olivia Rodrigo because that album was kind of shit. Olivia Rodrigo's Sour was the last time we had a major pop rock movement on the charts, and since then we've had a variety of it, but mostly as pastiches, nothing really new. So because of that, we've had this stagnant period for up to 5 fucking years where we really haven't had any new major developments thanks to COVID, Gen Z's obsession with nostalgia, along with just corporate recycling. So Sleep Token's new music is the first time we've seen a genuine shift in the way popular music can sound. So it makes perfect sense why after years of nothing, people would be kind of nefarious to the change. It's scary to see this kind of development happen, and it can change everything. Especially because some of the changes we have been seeing, Benson Boone, Gracie Abrams, they're not necessarily new. Sabrina Carpenter is the closest we've had to that, but she's still kind of doing the Marilyn Monroe Madonna kind of style of pop star that we've had for years. Poptimism is starting to kind of age out, and we're starting to see the next phase of that in electronic and hardcore music, along with hyperpop with acts like Rebecca Black and Charlie XCX. So seeing people give backlash to Sleep Token does kind of make sense. It's also important to understand this is, I believe, their third or fourth album, and their previous music was very ambient. It was filled with a lot of details and very lush and metal, and this project is a lot more electro prog rock, like it's a reverse Porcupine Tree. And again, it makes sense why people would be upset by that change, because we haven't really had this kind of development in years, and if you're a Sleep Token fan, you probably don't really want to see them. Okay, if you're not familiar with heavy metal, and I am a little, let me explain something. In 2022, Bad Omens released Death of the Peace of Mind, their third LP, and it was terrible. Their first two albums were these pretty harsh metalcore albums about faith, religion, and, personal trauma, but their newest album was a lot more dreary, bedroom inspired, and boring. And a lot of metal bands tend to go into this direction where you start out with something really brutal, like a fucking early Motionless in White, or maybe even a Converge sounding album that's really brutal and harsh. And then over the years, it kind of just becomes like what that Hard Reset project of 2023 was, where it's super generic, super commercial, and super empty. I talked about this a little bit with Chaos Bay, but a lot of the problems of metalcore is it doesn't really like being itself because of the stigma of emo, DIY, and punk. So it's trying to diverge to someone else. And that usually ends up going into indie pop. And yeah, that kind of seems to be the trajectory Sleep Token are going in, which I could understand why anyone would be weary of, including myself. Now, let's be clear that metal this year has had a pretty fantastic year. And the fact that this is charted is a really good sign for where metal could go, but it's more likely an ambient direction we're going in if this ends up being significant, which it might not. Most of this album's popularity is marketing, but softness is only for accessibility. We saw Knocked Loose blow the fuck up last year, and they made one of the most brutal albums of that year. So what's the deal with Sleep Token? Well, aside from savvy marketing, they have a much more varied audience of pop fans, ambient fans, experimental fans, metal fans, and there's been a lot of mixed opinions on this album because it's so different from their previous project, which to me reminded me of Deftones' shoegaze and black gaze, where this newest project sounds a lot more like early Porcupine Tree. God, this makes me want to do a video on Fear of a Blank Planet so bad. That song's so good. And honestly, I should be more angry, but frankly, I think I'm too fascinated because this doesn't sound like the band aren't trying. This sounds like the band's still doing their thing, just held back from the heavier stuff. And while I would prefer that, there are still a couple pretty brutal metal moments on this album, and it's not Sleep Token. It just lacks the things that made the last album good. I'm willing to see where it goes, but for the most part, I do find this project pretty interesting, and I would like to see where this project goes if it's willing to go anywhere. But as for that, for now, I just thought Even in Arcadia was a pretty good album, all things considered. But if you're looking for a really heavy, hardcore punk album to listen to, recently Pup released their newest album, and it is fucking great. So if you're looking for something heavy, I'd give that a shot.